12 months ago, America and China were practically in an economic war. Tariffs crossed 100% on both sides, factories were scrambling, supply chains were breaking, and nobody, absolutely nobody, was predicting that Donald Trump would be sitting across from Xi Jinping inside the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Today, May 14, 2026, that is exactly what happened. And what came out of that room should alarm every single one of you watching right now. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand why this summit was not just about trade. It was about chips, oil, Iran, and a warning from China that experts are calling the most severe Taiwan statement in modern diplomatic history. Something massive shifted, and you need to know exactly what. Picture this, April 2025. President Trump unleashes what he calls Liberation Day tariffs on China and dozens of other countries. China retaliates immediately, becoming the first major economy to fire back. Within weeks, both nations jacked tariffs on each other's goods past 100%. The U.S. and China squared off over rare earth elements, semiconductors, student visas, fentanyl precursor chemicals, Chinese soybean imports, and a long list of other pressure points. Think about that, tariffs above 100%. That is not a trade disagreement, that is economic warfare. At the same time, China suspended exports of a wide range of rare earths and related magnets, and banned semiconductors from key suppliers, a move that upended supply chains central to global automakers, with political and economic consequences rippling across Europe, Japan, and South Korea. The windshield wiper motor in your car? It uses a ring magnet. The turbine engine powering military aircraft? Ring magnet. Those were suddenly sitting behind a Chinese export license. And then there was Iran. Leading up to the summit, Washington accused Beijing of running industrial-scale campaigns to steal American AI technology, while China ordered companies not to comply with U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil and hosted Iran's foreign minister for a visit. This was the world 1 year ago. Dangerous, fractured, heading in the wrong direction. So what changed? Everything. And nothing. Depending on which side of the table you were sitting on. Now, if you are new to Verified Bulletin, this is where we break down what the mainstream media often glosses over. Real analysis, verified facts, no filler. If that is your kind of content, hit that subscribe button right now. It genuinely helps us keep doing this work, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Trump arrived in Beijing for a 2-day summit focused on trade and security, his first visit to China since 2017. China came into this meeting far more confident than it was back then, when it feared even a small rise in U.S. tariffs. Let that sink in. 9 years of change. 9 years of Beijing quietly, strategically building its leverage in rare earths, in chips, in global alliances, in oil markets, so that by 2026, Xi Jinping was not coming to the table scared. He was coming to the table with cards. Both countries had briefly jacked up tariffs on each other's goods to over 100%, but tensions had calmed since then, with both countries scaling back tariffs and China agreeing to halt export restrictions on rare earths. On the surface, that sounds like progress, but dig one layer deeper and a much more complicated picture starts to emerge. Trump and Xi held their first round of talks at the Great Hall of the People, 2 hours and 15 minutes behind closed doors. Trump described the talks as extremely positive, and at a state banquet later, invited Xi for a reciprocal visit to the White House on September 24th. Both leaders smiled. There were flowers on the table. A brass band was playing. Children waved American and Chinese flags. Everything looked warm. Everything looked stable. And then Beijing dropped a statement that stopped experts cold. Xi warned Trump that Taiwan is the most important issue in China-U.S. relations, and that if the issue is not handled properly, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. Read that again. Clashes, conflicts, great jeopardy. Xi also said that Taiwan independence and peace across the Taiwan Strait are as irreconcilable as fire and water. Fire and water. At a banquet, during a diplomatic summit with music and handshakes. China expert Michael Pillsbury, who has spent over 30 years analyzing Beijing's political signals, said this was unlike anything he had seen before. He called it the most severe warning ever issued by a Chinese leader at this type of diplomatic meeting. Think about that framing. Not in a formal Security Council, not in a military briefing, at what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. And here is the detail that should concern you most. There was no mention of Taiwan in the American readout from the White House, which focused on trade and the Iran war. America went silent on Taiwan. Whether that silence is strategic or something else entirely, that is a question you need to sit with. Because any rhetorical softening from Trump on Taiwan, even ambiguous, would be the most destabilizing outcome of the summit, according to Bonnie Glaser, managing director of the Indo-Pacific program at the German Marshall Fund. A tacit or explicit bargain in which Washington appears to concede a sphere of influence to Beijing over Taiwan could embolden China to take more assertive steps to erode Taiwan's autonomy. And Taiwan's own president has already sounded the alarm. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te warned that compromising with authoritarian regimes only sacrifices sovereignty and democracy. So we now have a situation where Xi is drawing a red line in the most explicit language he has ever used. America's response? A White House readout that does not even mention the island, the Taiwanese government watching from the outside, and the entire world left guessing what was actually agreed behind that closed door. Comment below right now. Do you think Trump gave anything away on Taiwan, or was the silence a deliberate negotiating move? Tell me what you think. I read every single comment. Now let's talk about the other explosive issue that was sitting right in the middle of this summit table: artificial intelligence chips, specifically NVIDIA. Trump called NVIDIA's Blackwell chip the super-duper chip and told reporters that America is about 10 years ahead of anyone else in sophisticated chips. That is not just chest thumping, that is leverage, because China knows it needs access to those chips to compete in the AI race, and America knows China knows that. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, was supposed to stay home. He initially was not among the executives joining the U.S. president to meet Xi Jinping, a sign that the chipmaker's sales in China were unlikely to recover soon. Then, things changed. Trump made a call. Huang made the trip. Why does that matter? Because NVIDIA's China market is worth billions, and the chip question is not simply about business. It is about who controls the future of artificial intelligence. For American AI giants like NVIDIA, the extent of any expanded cooperation with China remains to be seen. No announcement, no deal confirmed. A meeting happened. That is all we know. But here is what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, and this part is important. He pointed out that China's advancement in technology is, in significant part, a product of intellectual property theft and reverse engineering of American technology. His words, not a fringe claim, a direct accusation from the top U.S. diplomat. And yet, American tech CEOs were in the room during the bilateral talks. The tension there is extraordinary. You are simultaneously accusing a country of theft and opening the door to sell them your next-generation technology. Is that contradiction? Or is that strategy? Rubio would argue it is eyes-open engagement, not the same as the Biden era, where critics say the U.S. was naive about China's intentions. The argument now is, we know exactly what you are doing. We are arresting your intelligence agents on American soil, and we are still choosing to do business with you, on our terms, with our safeguards, and with full awareness of the risk. Whether you believe that framing is solid policy or dangerous optimism, keep watching, because the chip story is not over. Then there is Iran, and this is where things get genuinely complicated. Trump had spent weeks trying to persuade China to help bring Iran back to negotiations and ease tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, but those efforts were largely unsuccessful heading into the summit. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points for global oil supply. Any disruption there sends energy prices spiking around the world. Trump discussed the Iran war and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz during the summit with Xi, though Secretary of State Rubio told NBC News that the United States was not asking for China's help with Iran. Not asking. Interesting choice of words. Any cooperation between the U.S. and China on reopening the Strait of Hormuz could offer near-term relief in oil prices and on the energy crunch overall. That means if China quietly shifted its position on Iran, even slightly, it could have real, measurable impact on every person watching this video the next time they fill up their car or pay an energy bill. But China has skin in that game. Beijing buys Iranian oil. It is a significant part of how Iran keeps its economy afloat under American sanctions. Asking China to stop is essentially asking China to sacrifice a strategic energy relationship. And so far, Beijing has shown zero inclination to play by Washington's rules on that front. Leading up to the summit, China ordered companies not to comply with U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil. That was just before Trump arrived. That is not a coincidence. That is signaling. Now step back. Look at the full picture. Before this summit, the United States and China were locked in a cycle of escalation. Triple-digit tariffs, rare earth weaponization, chip wars, Iran oil defiance, Taiwan provocations, and tech theft accusations. Both sides were digging in. Experts were openly using the phrase Thucydides trap, the historical pattern where a rising power and a ruling power almost inevitably end up in conflict. Xi himself asked whether the U.S. and China could avoid the Thucydides trap during the summit. That is not small talk. That is a Chinese president acknowledging that the trajectory they are both on historically ends in war. He said it out loud, to Trump's face. Inside the Great Hall of the People, China was the first major economy to retaliate against Trump's Liberation Day tariffs in April 2025. 5 things shifted since then. Both countries scaled back tariffs, China agreed to halt rare earth export restrictions, and American business leaders joined Trump's Beijing delegation, signaling a fragile but real détente. Fragile being the operative word. Here is the thing that most outlets are not connecting for you. China's economy is not in great shape either. In 2024, China's GDP growth dropped to 5%, down sharply from the 9% annual growth rates it sustained for decades. Just over a year ago, the U.S. China relationship was far rockier. But China's economic slowdown has genuinely constrained how aggressive Beijing can afford to be. When 15.2% of your population is living on less than $8.30 a day, and your middle class is shrinking, you cannot fight a full-scale economic war with the world's largest consumer market indefinitely. That is leverage. Real, tangible American leverage. And the Trump administration knows it. But here is the open question that nobody can answer yet. China's 2025 rare earth export restrictions exposed a critical U.S. national security vulnerability. Washington responded with billions in financing and global partnerships. 1 year on, analysts assess the response and how far the United States still is from true resilience. America is still dependent, not as dependent as it was 12 months ago, but dependent enough that China holds a real card. Rare earth minerals go into virtually every advanced military and consumer technology. Fighter jet engines, electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones. China controls the majority of global processing capacity for these materials. Getting off that dependency is a multi-decade project, and in the meantime, Beijing knows it has a weapon it can deploy at will. So what does the world look like after this summit? The future trajectory of the relationship, whether toward cooperation or confrontation, will have massive consequences for the global economy. A contentious summit that deepens tensions could prolong economic and geopolitical volatility, crippling global trade and growth, according to Cornell economics professor Eswar Prasad, who said the outcome affects the very survival of the rules-based order. That is not hyperbole from a random pundit.
That is a senior economist telling you in plain language that the direction this relationship takes will determine what the global economic order looks like for the next generation. Trump called the talks great. He toured the Temple of Heaven with Xi. He toasted at a lavish state banquet and invited Xi to the White House in September. On the surface, the relationship moved from crisis to managed competition. But underneath, Taiwan's government is watching anxiously. Iran is still selling oil to China. NVIDIA still does not have a clear path back into the Chinese market, and rare earth independence for America is still years, possibly decades away. China came into this meeting far more confident than in 2017, when it feared even a small rise in U.S. tariffs. In the last year, Xi has been able to push back and neutralize much of Trump's actions. That is the story nobody is headlining. America went to this summit with carrots and sticks. China showed up with a smile, a state dinner, and a Taiwan warning carved in stone.
The question going forward is not whether these two powers can avoid conflict. The question is, which side blinks first on the issues that actually matter? Taiwan's autonomy, Iranian oil revenue, and who controls the chip supply chain that will define the next 50 years of technological power. Pay very close attention to what China does in the next 72 hours. Watch whether Beijing sends its bombers around Taiwan, as it has been doing for 18 months. Watch whether the rare earth moratorium gets extended or allowed to expire. Watch whether any concrete language emerges on Iran. Those three things will tell you far more than any banquet toast ever could. This summit was not the end of anything. It was round one of a conversation that is going to define the decade, and we are going to keep covering every development right here on Verified Bulletin, with the facts, the context, and zero spin.
If this video gave you something that your regular newsfeed did not, please hit like right now. It genuinely pushes this content to more people who need to see it. Subscribe to Verified Bulletin if you are not already part of the community. Every single subscriber helps us stay independent and keep producing content like this. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think Washington actually gave away in that room? And what do you think Beijing will do next on Taiwan? Stay sharp. We will see you in the next one.